Okay, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sakibu Hutchinson, and welcome to Black Skeptics LA's Voting While Black Secular and Gen Z panel. Black Skeptics is a secular humanist atheist advocacy organization based in South LA with a specific emphasis on Black radical humanist traditions and social justice. And one of our key initiatives is the First in the Family Scholarship Fund, which we created in 2013, with a strategic focus on redressing the school to prison pipeline by providing $1,000 scholarships to foster care, homeless, undocumented, LGBTQI, and system-involved youth of color. In 2014, due to a generous grant from the Freedom from Religion Foundation, we spearheaded the Katherine Fahrenger Scholarship Fund with a focus on secular youth of color with $2,500 awards. And as of this year, we were able to expand the award to a $5,000 scholarship. For our panel, we're pleased to feature three of our First in the Family Humanist Scholarship awardees from 2016 and 2020 in conversation about what's at stake in the upcoming election and how they specifically are mobilizing for progressive social change in what we know is a hyper-evangelical, white supremacist climate where Black people and Black communities continue to be under siege by neo-fascism and state violence. So I want to introduce our first panelist, who is Justin Fahar. Justin, correct me if I'm not pronouncing that properly.
It's Fahar.
Fahar, okay. And he is from Dartmouth College, just graduated. He is a 2020 awardee for the First in the Family Humanist Scholarship. And his interests include philosophy, genetics, creative writing, and psychology. He said in his bio for us that he loves to analyze the impact of gender, sexuality, and one's environment, and specifically on how a person is treated in society. I also just love writing in general, academic or creative, but I hope to write my own book one day. I'm planning on double majoring in anthro and biology with a minor in creative writing. And so one of the key themes that Justin emphasized in his essay was his identification as a humanist/agnostic. And he said, because we can't tackle big issues like God and the afterlife in simplistic ways, if there is a God, how can we as humans possibly understand a being like God? If there's a God that is all-seeing and all-powerful, I would have so many questions like, why can't he intervene during major harmful events like slavery and genocide? And so our next panelist is Kola Hayward Rotimi. He just graduated from Amherst College. He's a faculty assistant at the African American History, Culture, and Humanities Initiative, which is a part of the Maryland Institute for Technology and the Humanities. He is also a fiction writer who has been published in the Black speculative fiction magazine Faya Lit Mag, as well as Clark's World, which is a sci-fi journal. And so one of his key quotes from his winning essay in 2016 was, I believe that my concern about how non-secular thought affects people's worldviews and actions stems from how I was raised. In a household where secular thought was the norm since I was a child, I found it easier to learn about spirituality in its many forms. I not only identify as a secular person, but as an African American, which brings into play two different cultural aspects that contrast with mainstream society's view. Secular people are rarely seen in the media as people of color, let alone a young Black man raised by an African-American mother and a Nigerian-American father. The noted anthropologist and activist, Dr. Kamala Hayward Rotimi, and senior financial analyst, Kola Hayward Rotimi, are Kola's parents. And they raised him in a non-religious household. And so one of the biggest lessons that I learned growing up is to question everything. Everything was up for debate, even the idea of not believing in religion. We also have Jalen Williams, who is a 2020 awardee, and she is going to Albright College. She graduated from Central High School in Philadelphia. Her interests include binge watching TV shows from childhood, engaging in environmental-based community service, and exploring new facets of social justice and tolerance through social media platforms. Her major is going to be environmental studies, and she wants to minor in Spanish. And so one of her key quotes from her award-winning essay was, shunning and shaming people because they are different than you seems par for the course with religion. My mantra is, and I love this one, do no harm, take no shit. I think that what we do on earth while we are still here should be to improve our lives and the lives of others rather than doing things in an attempt to get into a cushy afterlife. Religion is often used in arguments against working to combat climate change. Religious fanatics believe their higher power is responsible for the rising temperatures and climate phenomena. And so now I want to introduce our moderator, Siobhan Taylor, who is a longtime member of Black Skeptics. Siobhan hosts and produced Lifestyle Radio on radiojustice.org, as well as co-produces the Flip the Script show on KPFK 90.7 FM here in LA. And combining her roots in community organizing and multimedia, she works with both independent and public institutions to bring overlooked and ignored groups to the forefront of political and social discussion. Siobhan is currently a trauma educator, facilitating workshops on the correlation between health and childhood trauma. She has trained medical professionals, teachers, social workers, and therapists in understanding childhood trauma and how to create a space for trauma-informed care. And thanks so much to you all for being here this morning/afternoon. So if you want to start, Siobhan, with the questions.
Oh, so just go ahead and start. I'm gonna jump right on in there then.
Jump right on in.
How are you guys doing? I'm really excited to be here to ask these questions because I know from a millennial perspective that there's a lot of conversations that are going on, and there's a lot more targeting towards millennials because they see us as the next generation of voters. But I do believe that there's a huge disconnect between politics, how it is now, and this connection to Generation Z. So I really appreciate you guys being here and having this space. Thank you, Sakibu and Black Skeptics and all the funders for this to make this happen, because this is really, really important. One of the key things that I found to be really interesting about this election is that there's all this conversation around voting and the importance of voting and how we have to get out here and vote. You guys may have seen some even egregious campaigns to try to get Black people to vote. I'm really curious to know what your take is on voting and how confident do you feel about using the current American electoral and voting system as a means of progress for Black people? Jalen, would you like to start?
Sure. So I guess in like seeing the campaigns or seeing the candidates that we have now, people are starting to open their eyes to the issues that we as Black people do face every day with prejudice from police and people of different races, and also a lack of representation in the media. I think a lot of Democrats, or at least people that are a bit more progressive, have spoken out in support of Black Lives Matter, which I do appreciate. But unfortunately, these moments of clarity about our issues are usually only following the death of a Black person at the hands of police. So I do think it'll take a lot more serious, like, unlearning and police reform in order for candidates to become more acquainted with our issues. I think a big reason why a lot of Black people don't vote nowadays is because they don't have any faith in the candidates. I've definitely seen members of my own family decide not to go to the polls because they don't have any faith in the candidates. Mm-hmm. So I just think we need to put a lot more money and time towards funding Black communities so that they feel more inclined to vote for these people or vote for the candidates that we have.
Okay, thank you for that. Justin.
Okay, in my opinion, I think the current election system / electoral college system is the opposite of what democracy should be. If you looked at the 2016 election, Donald Trump did not win the popular vote. It's just, I personally think it's a weird system where we have a general election, but then other people go and vote for whichever candidate they choose in the electoral college. It's not a direct democracy. I think we should move more towards basing it off the general vote, like the popular vote, or doing ranked choice voting, which some states are doing now. I think Maryland, I'm not sure. And I think the voting system as a progress for Black people, I think the voting system now and voting in general has a lot of racist laws and systematic oppression behind it, such as ID laws, which has been a huge problem for decades. As you make stricter ID laws, and studies have proven that Black people are less likely to have those IDs, you're systematically oppressing Black people from voting. Also, talking about restricting felons from voting, it's also been proven that Black people will receive higher sentencing and they're more likely to become labeled as felons for lesser crimes. So if you prevent felons from voting and Black people are more likely to be charged as felons for less crimes, then you're systematically oppressing Black people. So yeah.
Okay, thank you, Justin. Kola.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure I got the question right. It's basically you're asking how efficient or how strong the electoral politics and electoral vote is for Black communities here in
Do
the
you
country.
feel confident in that system?
Do I feel confident in that system? I don't think I would feel very confident about electoral politics, especially to build off of what Justin said a little bit is, it's not representative of a direct democracy, but I'd also want to add that from a historical context, it's never been representative of the whole country. And as we all probably know here, the country in itself is built on a foundation of like millions of people's deaths. This is a country that's built off of the blood of our people and blood of indigenous people and countless Black and brown bodies that have been intentionally left out of the conversation of who is someone we look to when asking for responses in politics, in this realm of politics. So because the system is set up like that initially, and it is still benefiting that same system, you're kind of falling into those similar traps with current electoral politics as well. That doesn't mean that they should be completely disregarded. Honestly, I kind of wish they could, but we're not at the point where we can do that. And there's a difference between a short-term and long-term approach, right? I don't believe that electoral voting and electoral politics, especially with the candidates that we have currently, are actually going to change anything significantly for our country, at least not for the better. But it's something that can be done that's more of a temporary breath of fresh air, I guess. I guess that's the only way I can really put it. The way I also put it is that, like, with candidates like Biden and Kamala and everything, I'm much more accustomed to their brand of violence than I am with Trump, because he's a lot more unpredictable. So at least if you can get someone like that elected, or you can use electoral politics to get somebody like that in office, you're at least able to kind of put your focus more on the longer term than the sort of like extremely reactionary, like rat race sort of deal that we're dealing with right now with the current administration.
Thank you. I know we have another panelist that's joining us. I do have follow-up questions, but I do want to keep you to introduce our next panelist, so that way we can ask him this question and then we'll get to the follow-up.
Absolutely. So I'm really pleased to introduce Mario Anderson. He's a 2016 BSLA First in the Family Humanist Scholarship winner. He went to UC Berkeley. He is also a graduate of our very own King Drew Medical Magnet School in South LA. So shout out of welcome to Mario.
Welcome, Mario. So I don't know if you got the chance to hear the question, but I'll repeat it. The question is, how confident do you feel about using the current American electoral and voting system as a means of progress for Black people?
Oh dear, that is a weighty one. My apologies for coming late, but I would have to say that my confidence is definitely not as high as I wish it would be. The system we have is very broken. There's just a ton of barriers in the way preventing people from voting, which is really going to depress turnout. However, I feel confident that it will work just in this election to get us into transition us into a better direction, so that we can improve it and have, as Justin said, a more direct democracy type of system.
So I'm so glad you said that, because that kind of feeds right into my follow-up question that all the panelists are definitely invited to answer. So a lot of what we're hearing also, especially the push from the Democratic side, is that we need to get Biden elected in order to get Trump out. And I also noticed that Kola mentioned that there was that there's, I guess, well, both of you guys are saying that there's this difference between Trump brand of white supremacy versus Biden's, and at least what I refer to as his version of white supremacy. Now, my question to you is it really safer to pick someone or to vote for someone who is the devil we know versus the devil we don't know? Well, because I heard you say Trump was unpredictable. So I'm always just curious about that conversation itself. Is the lesser of two evils really progress? And is there really potential for progress for Black people in that sort of thinking? And anyone is open to answer that.
I'm probably going to jump in real quick, and then I'll let everybody else jump on too. But I don't believe in lesser of two evils. I think that if you're starting to have those sort of choices, then there's something gravely wrong with your system in the first place. And that's pretty obvious, I think, to anybody who's lived through the past like 4 or 5 years, let alone the course of this country as a whole, right? But with this sort of case, it's less that, you should choose to vote for someone like Biden because he's less evil and more just, I see it as a very, I guess almost like a utilitarian sort of prospect, right? Like you have specific policies and you have specific behaviors that Democrats typically go for. While both parties are extremely neoliberal and they're very much affected by corporate interests and stuff like that, Republicans tend to go for that sort of like nationalist, regressive, trying to maintain status quo type of thing very explicitly, while Democrats do it implicitly. So you have at least a moment where you can take a breather. And by like, that's kind of what I said before too, is like taking a breather by, at least you're not literally getting directly violently attacked. At least majority of people aren't. Because presidents in general are typically very good at outsourcing their violence to places outside of the country, so you don't really see it happening. You don't really care as much directly anyway. But with what Trump does is, and the Trump administration has kind of brought some of that home, and that's why a lot of people are very uncomfortable with that sort of aspect. Biden is running on the sort of thing of like, we're going to go ahead and push that out again. We're going to try to go back to normal, which doesn't exist anyway. But like, I think that's the whole thing of like, well, I don't really buy into his whole rhetoric and Kamal's rhetoric about like, they're going to try and bring things back to sanity and save things, since they haven't really been able to address a lot of the issues that are going to come up to them because of the after effects of Trump. I think that at the very least, the ways in which they react to their people and the ways in which they're going to enact their destructive policies and everything we just have decades more experience with that. Like these are patterns that we've seen happen over and over again, right? It's more like Bush and less like what Trump is doing. Or more like Obama and less than what Trump is doing, right? So it's like something you can actually at least plan a little bit for. Because regardless of who's getting into office, we're still going to be in crisis mode. I think that's something that people need to be okay with and understand, right? We're still going to be struggling with these problems. It's just more about like, who would you rather be directly having to grapple with as you try to make a counter attack, like a response to?
Mm-hmm. Did anyone else want to jump in on that before I move to the next question?
I'll hop in.
Mm-hmm.
I must kindly disagree with my fellow panelist here. I believe that there is such a thing as the lesser of two evils, and I feel that context is really everything. And the biggest thing that I see as the point of this election is the ability to respond to the needs of the people. And as we've seen in the past 4 years, responding to the needs of the people is not a very high priority, and especially of Black and Brown communities. And what I see in Joe Biden being the lesser of two evils is at least in some ways a way to have a government that does respond, because as he did say, we are in a state of crisis and we need a government that is snappy and responsive to the needs of the people. And I do see the current Democratic nominee as a lot more responsive. And when a government is responsive, that is when you can get change. And so I do see him as the lesser of two evils. I would prefer better, but I'll take what I can get.
I think a lot of voters are echoing that sentiment, Mario. I do have a question though, in follow up to that. Do you feel like, so let's say this, with what we've seen, the injustice that just currently happened in regards to Breonna Taylor, right? With that and all of the other murders that we've seen continuously, do you feel that all Americans, well, first question, do you feel that all Americans have the same needs? Because we're saying respond to the needs of the people. Do all people have the same needs? Second question is, one of the things we've heard Biden say is that we want to fund, he said we should fund more police, give them more funding. And how does what you're saying grapple with his concept of, responding to the people? If our people are saying, hey, we should defund, we're putting a lot of funding into criminal justice, and which isn't even really justice. We're not putting enough money into prevention. We should be putting funding into that. And then Biden comes out and says, well, I hear you, but we should be funding them more. Do you feel that Biden is then responding to the needs of the people?
That is a very good question. Yes and no. So, as you said, there are different needs for different communities, and the way I understand his response to the needs of the people is that while what he says is very neoconservative and such, I personally take more look at the actual policy. And in that regard, the policy itself is very, very different from what we have currently. And when I was talking about responsiveness, I meant responsiveness to all communities, given all communities have different needs. And in Black communities, I feel like there is a sort of middle ground, a sort of way to have progress while still not entirely making an entirely new system from scratch. Like let's say the criminal justice system, which is in its current state or its constant state awful. When I think about how to fix the problem, my first mind says that the only way to do it is to disestablish it and make a new one. However, given just how riled up everything is, that may not be the best idea, because uncertainty in a time of crisis is not what you need. I believe that evolution is a way to solve problems in sometimes a more effective way than revolution. And so I feel that if we can improve the system we have, then that takes all of the complexities out of establishing an entirely new one. And so in that case, I feel that fixing the system we have will help people in a way that is similarly beneficial to entirely destroying it, while also having a broader base of people, especially given that white people, who are the majority of this country, may not fully understand the issues of race. So that was very long, but I hope I was clear in that answer.
I believe you were. I'm just curious to know what the other panelists might have to say in response to that. I see Cola nodding, but I also want to make sure Justin and Jalen get a chance to jump in too. But Cola, would you like to go ahead and respond?
Oh no, I would definitely want to hear from Justin, Jalen first before
Okay.
I jump in.
Jalen or Justin, would you guys like to respond or even answer the same question around, we were hearing, Biden come out and say we need to fund more police, even in response to a lot of Black Americans saying we need to defund the police. And I'm curious to know what your response is to that, and also maybe in response to some of the things Mario may have said just a minute ago.
I would say, first of all, it was new to me that he said that he wanted to fund the police more. I just looked that up. I was like, oh, wow, did he really say that? He did. But he also said that he doesn't want to defund the police. He wants to make sure that they have access to community policing and make sure that their departments are full of social workers, psychologists, and those kinds of people who can help police officers with their biases against people and some of the things that might hinder them from doing their job equivalently with everyone. I don't know. I guess I'm not necessarily in the defund the police camp. I would say I do think that's a good idea to make sure that police do have the support that they need so that they can support communities. Do all people have the same needs? I guess not, but I don't know how you would like make that sound good for everybody. Like, I can see how Black people would be like, yeah, like we have different needs than everybody, but then some people on the other side might say, well, everybody's human, right? Everybody's, no matter what race you are, we're all the same. So I don't know if we really need to have different needs for everybody. So I think that's a good thing to think about. I don't necessarily have an answer, but I'll definitely be thinking about that for today.
Well, let me ask you this. If one group's needs are met, does that not benefit other groups? If more Black African Americans, for example, have their, let's say, economic needs met, does that not benefit the country?
This is true, because more Black doctors, more Black psychologists, all that kind of thing, that would be good. I agree with that. Okay, I agree with that.
It was just a question. It was just a question. But thank you so much, Jalen, for sharing that. And I think that's a really important perspective too that you just dropped in there, which is not everyone, and I believe Mario was also making that point, not everyone, even in the Black community, has the same perspective on politics and issues that affect the Black community. Some people have different strategies that they believe would work, and I appreciate you for introducing that also to the conversation, which is really the point of this discussion in full, really, right? It's not all Gen Z does not have the exact same opinions or beliefs. Justin, did you want to jump in?
Oh, yeah, I just want to say that I guess I agree and disagree with some points of what Mario said. Personally, I am in the defund the police camp position type thing. I believe that in a lot of cities and towns, the police have way too much of the budget, especially when their social programs are so underfunded. And I think that, honestly, not the police should be abolished, but they should definitely be reformed. It is insane how in some states it takes longer amount of time to become a hairdresser than a cop. And I think right now cops are built in a certain way, not built, trained in a certain way to deal with one type of situation. Like, think about what a cop has: a gun, handcuffs, things that are very aggressive. But you don't need those things, let's say a domestic violence situation, someone that has mental health issues and you need to take them in for help and training. And I feel like they're just a part of this huge system that enforces punishment and enforces violence. And that's why, because, I'm sorry, it's kind of like taking a hammer to a nail. It's a very violent situation, very violent profession. And I feel like personally, they do need to be defunded, but also they need to be defunded because they have too many resources that they're not doing enough with. If that makes sense?
Yes.
I feel like in every town, in every state, there's always better things to spend money on than basically people with anger issues and guns. But I'm sorry, that was probably an extreme comment, but whatever. But yeah, I think they do need more training. Well, not more training, different type of training. Yeah, I guess, if that makes sense. Sorry if I sound convoluted or whatever, but.
No. And you guys, please don't apologize for your answers or how you speak. You guys speak very well. I know that sounds like a Black person, you guys speak very well. You guys get that. But you guys are speaking very well. You're answering the questions the way you're supposed to. And whatever comes to your mind, even if it trails you to a different point, feel free to go there. This is a discussion. This is not this isn't a debate. This isn't, nobody's grading you or anything like that. So please, please do not apologize. You guys are giving fantastic answers. And Justin, I want to say, I really appreciate something that you said as a trauma educator and a trauma-informed care educator. De-escalation is something that I am a big, big fan of. One of the things that I train teachers to do is to de-escalate students in the classroom. But much like officers, their approach is very authoritative. Justin, you also highlighted this concept of crime and punishment. And that's a constant theme in American society, right? We see it in our parenting, we see it in our schools, we're also seeing it in our policing. So you're raising some really good points, Justin. Thank you so much for that. Kola, I saw you nodding and moving and making faces, so I know you ready.
Yeah, oh man. I'm definitely not going to be able to cover half of all the really interesting comments that my other panelists have brought up. But on the topic of the police, defund and abolish. In the South, they originated as slave catchers. In the North, they originated as corporate henchmen. So they got to go. There are definitely different other ways of making this work. And I mean, I know about a year ago, I didn't know nearly as much as I do now about the whole process. And I didn't actually really understand the historical or political context behind the police. But then I started to do a lot more reading, specifically Angela Davis's Are Prisons Obsolete, which helped me really understand alternative systems to the current police state. And like, we literally do live in a police surveillance state, full stop, especially after 9/11 and the rise of Patriot Act and the Department of Homeland Security's creation. Like, this is not a normal or beneficial system for anyone involved, let alone Black people. I think another thing you brought up a bit earlier too was the concept of helping a particular group out, and in the process, a lot of other groups get helped out as well. And you were talking about specifically within the context of Black people, and yeah, I think that's also kind of hints at like concepts of Afro-pessimism, right? The idea that Black people within America are kind of in this very specific place, like this very specific societal position, which kind of leads us to this level of almost being inhuman. Like there's these levels of us being in this really particular semi-permanent societal economic position within the country that everyone is trying to run away from being Black, or everyone is trying to manipulate that sort of identity in certain ways because it means something very particular in this country. If you're able to liberate Black community, then that means that you've also been capable of liberating a lot of other things in the process. I'm forgetting the specific, because I'm cribbing a little bit from a specific activist collective. I'm forgetting the specific name at the moment, but they talked a lot about this in terms of specifically Black queer people and Black women. If you're able to liberate those groups specifically, that means you have to also be abolishing patriarchy, you have to be abolishing homophobia. There's a lot of the things that are kind of stacked up in that. So when you're seeing these sort of identities oppressed, that means you're actually seeing kind of like intersectionality in action, right? You're seeing a lot of different forms of oppression that are all very like webbed together. They're hard to separate, but they're all kind of hammering together these really specific points. And Black people tend to be at the, at the other side, the side that's getting pressed down on that level. And that's one of the reasons why I don't think a candidate like Biden can actually effectively respond to these sort of options, because historically and in the contemporary era, his track record's pretty trash, like just straight up. He has been a major architect of the prison system that we know today. He's a big component of the Iraq War. Just recently, like literally a few days, I think maybe yesterday or 2 days ago, my jaw dropped when I went on his Twitter and he was saying like, we should pray for the cops that got shot or something at a riot. And it's like, this is not the sort of person who's going to be actually fighting for your rights in that sense. At the very best, what a candidate like Biden will do is at least maybe open up the the discussion for other people, for other people to step in and start talking about things. It's similar to how I felt about Bernie, actually. In the sense that a lot of the times when we look at politicians, I don't think we take in the full context of not just their policy, but the state of the country that they're going to be kind of inheriting and like trying to deal with. Someone like Bernie, if he had actually gotten elected or something, I doubt that he would have actually been able to do half of the stuff he was talking about he wanted to do. But what he would have done was at least give more exposure to leftist conversations that have been pretty much suppressed since the Red Scare. So there's like those sort of things that kind of come into play. Biden will at least be able to help us grapple directly with concepts of neoliberalism, our aversion to talking about climate change in any meaningful sense. All that stuff is like just not going away. And I think maybe that sort of discussion, it's kind of good that we're having them now and that he's kind of bringing those things to the forefront at the moment.
Okay, I want to ask one last question before I open it up to the audience. So in particular, in how candidates, presidential and otherwise, how they connect to the Black community, a lot of times when they want to be seen, you see them in photo ops with Black pastors or worshiping at a Black church on like Sunday, a random Sunday or whatever. In 2020, do you feel like this is a strategy that is still used because it's effective, or has it become outdated? And how do you feel about this strategy? I'm going to open that up to the group, whoever would like to jump in first.
I guess I could go first. Personally, I do think that's a tactic that's still used. It's used for optics. I think it's especially used by Republican candidates, but I would argue that it's used by both. Personally, I think I did see a photo yesterday. It was an article talking about Trump and what he's trying to do against the gender and race gap, like, talking about like in terms of pay. And it was him huddled over some document with a bunch of Black people touching his shoulder in like this supportive moment. But you have to realize how fake that kind of is, because Trump, kind of like Biden, have had a huge track record of racism. He didn't like Black people in 1989 when he called for the killing of the exonerated 5. He doesn't like Black people now. And honestly, I think it's both A, racism, and B, because they're not his vote. Like, Black people are not his voter base. They're just not. Like, it's a very small proportion. But those photos, it gets more Black people on his side. It makes them think like, oh, maybe he'll fight for me, instead of, I guess, Biden, which he also does that. But I guess because Biden has a bigger minority base, I guess some people are also willing to overlook that. But I do think Democrats should be held to that same standard. Yeah, it's nice stuff.
Awesome, thank you for that answer. Who else would like to answer that? As far as the effectiveness of utilizing the church photo op, is it still useful in 2020? Is it outdated? Should we be looking at something different? How do you feel about the strategy itself?
I'll go. I would have to say that it very much is a form of pandering, and it is kind of outdated. We really do need politicians really do need to update their wheel well. However, I feel that the pandering does have one good thing about it. It really shows just how they want to be perceived. Like it's not really effective in the act itself, but it really reveals a lot about the person running. Like going to for example, Trump standing in front of the church with the Bible versus just off the top of my head, for an example, like going to a mosque and praying there it shows like what your intentions are. And while it is definitely very fake, I feel that getting that sense of intentionality is helpful. But they should stop that, because pandering is just not cool anyway.
Sounds like you were really excited when you saw the Democrats were up there with the kente cloth and kneeling. You were really excited about that?
Goodness, I was laughing at them. But I was like, you know what? You old white people are trying to say we care about Black people, and that is a step in the right direction. You get 1 point for that, not anything else.
For symbolism. Symbolism. You get a point for symbolism.
Exactly.
Jalen.
Yes. So the church photo op thing, I think it is probably effective amongst the religious part of the Black community. They probably do like those kind of pictures. I personally am not swayed by these pictures because I know that right after they took the pictures, they got right into their black Escalade with the tinted windows and the bulletproof doors, and they went right back into their cushy lifestyle in the suburbs. Um, if anything, I would like to see more of a commitment to helping Black people through regulations that only politicians can pass and funding more opportunities for the Black community to become more enriched, like literacy and food drives and more things that just help us rather than just photos. If they were going to go and take photos to pander, I guess, I would like to see them doing more community-based work with like maybe neighborhood gardens or organizations that are well known in the community, like maybe an African American Chamber of Commerce. Or I would like to see them interacting with the children of today, because the votes that we all pass today and the actions of politicians tomorrow will undoubtedly affect them the most.
I hope they see this and they see this list that you brought out of what you could be doing instead of going to these churches.
Yes.
I love that. Kola, would you like to jump in on that, and then we'll go to the audience?
Yeah. Yeah, I think like this is me spitballing here because I'm not part of these generations, but I'm assuming that those sort of images are aiming towards older Black population, specifically the religious older Black population. And I think that that's also indicative of how the current like runners and everything are focusing a lot of their attention. I've noticed that I think they're really aiming for not just that sort of older block because they kind of know those people are probably going to vote for them, but also they're trying to reel in like mild conservatives and stuff like that, people who are a bit turned off by Trump, but they weren't wanting to like take the full leap, and vote Democrat. So like that's kind of where they're trying to hit that sweet spot, which I think a lot of these appeals to religion and more conservative values has been useful for them. Now, whether or not it's useful to get in other populations, I doubt it. I know personally it's not something that's working for me, but then again, nothing that they're doing is working for me. So I can't really say. From what I've heard, though, from my friends who are also around my age and who've been watching this stuff, yeah, it's not hitting anything. It's honestly, I think it's a little bit better than like when Hillary was trying really hard with the whole Snapchat thing. I don't know if you all remember that, but that was an experience. It's less embarrassing, I'll put it that way. But it just shows how out of touch they are. I don't think they really know what they're doing, but what can you do?
I'm laughing because I just keep thinking about all of the different things that candidates do to connect to younger audiences. You guys remember Hillary's, I keep hot sauce in my purse thing. And recently we've seen the Kamala Harris wears Chucks and Timbs movement.
And there were some weird looking Timbs too.
Like, that's what everyone who wears Timbs was saying, which I thought was really funny. Thank you so much to the panelists. I want to open it up to the audience to ask a question or give a comment, but keep it brief. When I say brief, we mean like 15 seconds because we want to make sure everyone gets out of here on time. So I'm sure you want to get to your Saturday, and we want to make sure we emphasize the young people. I'm saying young people, Generation Z. You guys like being called young still? Yeah. I like being called millennials. We love being called young. That's why I'm asking. But yeah, so we want to make sure we highlight our young people. So audience, who would like to ask a question? Just raise your hand and I will make sure I call on you. If you don't have a question, I got plenty. So I got a whole list. No audience questions yet? Okay, well, I'll tell you what. Oh, Daniel, did you want to go? We can't hear you. And hopefully I'm saying it. Is it Daniel or Denial? No, there's no sound. I'm sorry.
Type it in chat.
There we go. Adjust the mic settings. That's right.
Oh, sorry about that.
Is it Daniel or Denial?
It's Denial, but you can also call me Ro. People know me as either Denial or Ro.
Denial. Okay.
Hi. Just saying hi. First of all, bringing you greetings from DC. We're on the East Coast. And so we are in fellowship together with your group. I've been to a BSLA get together a couple years back. So I just wanted to say hey first. I wanted to make a comment that could be a question, but generally about someone had mentioned something, and I'm super proud of like all of the young people for your outspokenness, and so I want to put that out there. But the kind of question someone had made me think about was with regards to the sort of better or worse, sort of lesser of two evils argument, and it was a little bit of a, two ideologies, I guess, there. And I just wanted to hear a little bit more about how some of you all, I guess, in the audience as well, feel about that. I'm completely on board with the criticisms of the system that we have generally. And I consider myself to be a student of all of this as well. But I also, my comfort, my lifestyle in my particular world also depends on all of us being able to recognize those differences when it really, really comes down to it, and not to sort of.
Okay, so Daniel, really, just real quick, what is the one thing you want them to respond to? Just one in a sentence.
I wanted to explore the idea of it all just being bad, like it's to the point where it's just it's all trash and there's no.
Okay. So that kind of contends with something Mario was saying. He doesn't use Mario. I remember you said you didn't really believe in destroying or completely dismantling the system itself. So I'd be interested in hearing your response to what he's saying.
I'd be glad to give a response. So when you I definitely would be the first one in line to agree and say, like, yes, the system we have, it is a hot steaming pile of garbage. I mean, there are definitely innumerable problems. However, one thing I have noticed whenever I look through history, it's like I see that the systems that stay relatively long and evolve with the times often do better than the ones that go through revolution after revolution, because whenever you have a revolution, it's very hard to start something from scratch instead of having like a framework to work on. And I'm which is not to say that the system we have has always been good and fair to Black people or people in general. It is to say that at least with the system we have, there is already an infrastructure that we can use. Because with all the bad things that our government has done, it also has done some good things. And if we can take the framework of how we did the good things and improve the way we do the bad things, we can make progress in a way that is a lot less unstable than, say, tearing everything down from scratch and then starting anew.
It sounds like you're saying that we should utilize the frame still, even if instead of destroying it all, you have to have something to work from. Is that what you're saying?
Thank you. You are so much more eloquent than I am.
Well, we are going to wrap. Thank you so much for everyone that participated. And I'm so glad for everyone that responded. Just really quickly, we're going to end, but I just want to ask one question. What issues are currently on your ballots in your locally or statewide that you feel people should know about? Just really quickly. If you could just quickly, maybe any propositions that you know about, any local things or measures that are on your ballots.
Me, I guess I'll go. Funding for Planned Parenthood, that is in danger if Donald Trump gets reelected. So that's something to keep in mind.
Okay.
I'd say definitely voting rights, because without voting rights, there is no representative democracy.
Okay. Kola or Jalen?
I know for the Philadelphia ballot. Oh,
Go ahead, Jalen.
Go.
okay. So for the Philadelphia ballot, I know that 3 of the questions, according to ballotpedia.org, 3 of the questions are based on recent things with Black Lives Matter and George Floyd. Specifically, we're going to vote on ending unconstitutional stop and frisk in Philadelphia, as well as creating a Citizens Police Oversight Commission for Philadelphia to be able to put some more pressure on the police to do correctly.
Awesome. Kola?
Yeah. I'm still trying to get my head around a lot of the local stuff that's going on. But something that that's been an issue with North Carolina since forever, pretty much, is the gerrymandering and kind of the situation with how the counties themselves have been shaped up, which heavily favor Republican voters. I think that's something that they've been trying to push back on recently. So I'm definitely keeping an eye on that.
Awesome. I think that's it. As the moderator, I just want to throw out there, y'all should pay attention to Prop 20 in California. They're trying to change a lot of the criminal justice laws, including turning some misdemeanors into felonies. And we know who that targets and who that affects. So please pay attention to us on your local and state ballots, not just the presidential election. That's pretty much it. I'm going to send it over to Sakivu. Thank you again, everyone, for participating. This is such an important conversation. I hope we can have more conversations like this, not just in a panel, but just to have these conversations, which is one of the things I really appreciate about Black Skeptics and why I joined years ago, is because we had these conversations that weren't just the typical, atheist, is there a God, not a God, let's debate a bunch of semantics and BS that has nothing to do with nothing. When we have specific things that affect us as Black people and Black atheists and skeptics and humanists. So I really appreciate Black Skeptics and Sakivu for this opportunity. I'm going to go ahead and shoot it over to Sakivu. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Siobhan, and to all of our brilliant and visionary panelists. Appreciate you all, and keep moving, keep pushing in progressive activism and mobilizing. I just want to let you know that you've gotten a lot of accolades in the chat box. There's Walter H. who says, I'm glad to hear the views of young people. This is not a normal election cycle like in, say, 2004. The Republicans' core is white evangelicals. We're not getting Black issues even discussed if the White House occupant is reelected. So that's something to consider, that we are under siege in conditions of full-out white supremacist, fundamentalist, dominionist neo-fascism. That's something to consider. One question that I had as a parting salvo for the panelists is, what have you thought about when it comes to the divestment from public education that has been spearheaded under the leadership of the utterly abject, utterly corrupt Education Secretary, Betsy DeVos? This is someone who is a multimillionaire who has systematically funneled public funds for urban schools, for rural schools, predominantly of color, public funds that are now going to private, religious, faith-based institutions. So that is something that has been a linchpin of this neo-fascist Trumpian government that we definitely will not see under a Biden-Harris administration. And I'm bringing that up because you all just graduated, with the exception of Mario and Kola, from high school. And so you felt the effects of that type of regime up close and personal in terms of these things that we're talking about. If we're looking at the school system and the authoritarian control of school police in urban schools, LAUSD, you have thousands of police officers and very few mental health and wellness counselors, psychiatric social workers, after-school programs. We could go on and on with that. So that's something that is near and dear to our hearts in Black Skeptics, because the impetus for the scholarship was the fact that the school to prison and sexual abuse to prison pipeline have had such an ironclad hold on African descent young people here in urban communities of color. Just something to think about. So I don't know if we had anyone who felt that they weren't heard during this discussion that had a last minute question before we close out. I saw Jatana raise her hand, or their hand. I don't know, Jatana, if you wanted to weigh in before we close out the discussion. Didn't want to overlook you.
Oh, no worries. So I'm here with my daughter, Makaya, and there's been a major push by Trump supporters to try to get the Latino vote, and they're really focusing on the Democrats want to dismantle the family structure. They want to take religion completely out of America, which for me is not a bad idea, but I don't think that's what the Democrats are really doing, you know. And I just wanted to, my only question was, have any of you experienced or heard about they're doing the same thing in Black communities? Are they really trying to get the religious folks to vote against their own self-interest based on religion and religious issues?
Yeah, I can weigh in on that real quick. I think something that I've been focusing on recently, which has been really disturbing, is the rise of the QAnon conspiracy theory, which is that would be like a whole hour-long discussion in itself. But one of the major proponents of it is the religious aspect. It's very evangelical, actually, and it's now recently started to spread outside of a core white base, and is specifically targeting Black people, and that's going through some like rebranding of, like, instead of talking about Trump specifically, they talk about things like Save the Children campaigns, which are like, you know, they're pretending like they're caring about basically child trafficking and stuff like that, when it's actually just a way to kind of indoctrinate you into their conspiracy theory. And that stuff is getting really big. And not only is it getting really big, but even after the re-election, regardless of who wins, they're going to be around to stay, because they're actual pro-QAnon supporters in Congress and stuff now. Like, it's actually very disturbing, like the sort of people who are running for this stuff. So that's something I've really been concerned about, especially in terms of the Black population.
Thank you so much for sharing.
Mm-hmm.
Great. And so I don't know if any of the other panelists want to weigh in.
I just wanted to say really quickly, first of all, I appreciate all of the panelists' views, listening to all the panelists' views, and I appreciate you sharing what you feel. That makes me feel very inspired. I really mean that. I said that in the chat, but I'm repeating myself. But I'm a teacher, and so I do, going back to what you were saying about, you know, the defunding of public schools slowly but surely to now go toward privatizing. And I see it on a firsthand basis. I've been seeing it over the years. Slowly, certain programs are being taken away. We have at my school in particular, we have one part-time nurse who comes in once a week, where we used to have, you know, for the whole school of 250 children, 250 something children. And then they were expecting us to possibly come back to the school during this pandemic with this half-time nurse. And so I feel, you know, very strongly about that too. I think that's a concern of mine, one of the concerns of mine, if we continue to have this Trump administration. I'm not in love with Biden either, but I know that at least if Biden were in office, there would be a little less of a chance that there would be this big, heavy push and trend toward privatizing and taking money away from public schools, which I believe many Black and brown people, children, would be greatly affected by that.
Absolutely. And there's some really great comments in the chat. Siobhan Riley/Sadly said, are we supposed to be in school or juvie? And some of the other panelists were talking about how there were police substations on their campuses, how routinely you would go into our schools and you would see Black boys and Black girls being apprehended and being assaulted, basically, by school police officers. We had random searches in LAUSD up until